I'm sorry, but whether you like Trump or not, this is the first time that a president has taken boxes and boxes of documents home with him when he left. That is not normal conduct.
Welcome back to Lawish. Was that too happy, bro?
No, you should keep the breaking news. It's hilarious.
Welcome back to Lawish. Today we have breaking news. We are recording this video on Tuesday, August 9th, 2022. Yesterday, Mar-a-lago happened. Mar-a-lago, the residence of former President Donald Trump, was raided by the FBI. So that's the topic for today. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss not only the implications, but also the means and the reasoning behind raid. So Jeff, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, so this was a raid obviously conducted through the Justice Department by the FBI.
Federal
That's right.
Bureau of Investigation.
So as the name implies, this is a federal organization. It is a federal investigation, and it allegedly
From a federal bureau.
potentially federal crimes that were broken. So since this is a federal crime, it would be controlled by the federal rules of criminal procedure.
Now we say it's a federal crime, and we'll tell you what the potential crime is, right? Because right now we don't know. We know what the crime is. We don't know if the crime was committed.
Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
But the investigation is, it's a federal investigation. And since this was a raid, any sort of raid requires a warrant. And a warrant is essentially a piece of paper that gives the investigating agency, in this case the FBI, authority to enter somebody's residence or company, business, whatever the situation may be, property of another.
The location of the search.
Absolutely.
It allows them access to that location of the search. Like you said, it could be a house, could be your business, could be your car, could be your vicinity.
And there's four things that warrant really needs to have or identify for a judge to sign off on it. And that is, one, there has to be some sort of probable cause to suggest that a crime was committed. There has to be probable cause that there's evidence of that crime at whatever location this warrant is for. There has to be also, it has to be particularized, and it can't just be a open warrant that says we're looking for basically a fishing expedition. If you're looking for guns, say like rifles, you're not going to look in a kitchen drawer, you know. So it's got to make sense.
Because sometimes a lot of there's arrest warrants, right?
Yeah.
And they act in a similar way. If you're looking for a person, you can't tell someone, I need to look inside your dishwasher.
Yeah. Unless the person can fit in there.
I guess.
But
that's the point, yeah.
it's got to make sense. And the reason is, again, the judge is signing off on it being, a specific crime that was supposedly committed. At least there's reasonable suspicion or probable cause. There's probable cause to, suggest that there was a specific crime that was committed. Probable cause to show that there's evidence of that crime there. So in the particularized point, it just has to make sense. You can't be just getting a warrant and then going there and tearing the entire place apart looking for any evidence of any crime. And now that doesn't mean if you find evidence of another crime that you can't use that to charge the person. So say you go in there and you think that this person committed a robbery. You're looking for cash that was stolen from a bank. And you look in a kitchen drawer or a dresser and you find a brick of cocaine. Well, it's not like, the warrant only says we're looking for cash.
How to ignore that?
So we didn't see that. No, you can absolutely prosecute that. And it comes into a whole other situation where there's all types of things that come into play here. There's also something called that, if it's in the open, essentially, and you see something on a table, you can prosecute them for that. But that's kind of going outside the scope of this. But the point is, it has to make sense in regard to the crime that supposedly was committed and, the location you're looking at. And it has to be tied to whatever the alleged offense is, the evidence. So the last part of that is, we've kind of already touched on, but a judge has to sign off on that and basically agree that, okay, yeah, there is probable cause, there's sufficient cause shown that I believe, based on what you told me, the affidavit, what you're telling me now, that in fact the crime has been committed, And it sounds like there is evidence to support that allegation at this location. And so once the judge signs off, you got the warrant. It's in a bow. You got your piece of paper. You're ready to go do your raid. And that's what brings us to
All your friends.
Mar-a-Lago.
Okay, so now that we know the elements of a warrant, right? We need to have probable cause that a crime was committed. We need to have some sort of evidence that the location you're trying to search has more evidence of that crime, right? And it needs to be particularized to, okay, I'm going to look for those locations. I'm going to look in the places that are reasonable where I can find this evidence. And the judge has to sign off on it. Well, now let's talk about what is the crime here. Yeah. In this case, in Mar-a-Lago, Mar-a-Lago TM, what was the crime, Jeff? What was the alleged crime?
Yeah, so the main crime that's being speculated, and we don't really have enough information now, but from the Trump Jr. insinuated, he was the one who first found out about the raid going on, that it was tied to the Presidential Records Act. And that would certainly make sense because Trump was already investigated regarding that act. To some extent, 15 boxes of documents were recovered from Mar-a-Lago in that regard. But the act itself really protects any sort of documents that the president or the vice president had during their term in office. They're supposed to preserve those documents because the act itself and those documents are property of the United States, not ex-President Trump or whatever president was in office. So they're supposed to leave those and preserve them for the records as well. We have our own archives where these are stored. We basically just documents all the stuff for future use, potentially for public records requests, assuming they're unclassified. But usually this act really ties into classified documents in the sense that a lot of the classified stuff's already kind of out there. But even the unclassified stuff is good for historians. The public has an interest in that because it obviously has to do with our country. So you're supposed to preserve those.
Yeah.
And, so that's really what it's meant to do. It's meant to do just that, preserve those documents, make sure they're retained after the president and the vice president leave office.
So the allegation here is that there was a violation of the Presidential Records Act, meaning these records that you just discussed that should be in the possession of the Presidential Archive were not, meaning former President Trump took them to his house.
Yeah.
All right, okay, I'm going to take my papers with me.
Yeah.
So that is the allegation that there was a violation by President Trump taking these documents. He was violating the Presidential Records Act.
Yeah. And we know some of the documents that were recovered in the 15 boxes previously were, I mean, it still violated the act technically, but they were innocent in nature. There were letters from Kim from North Korea, to him, praising him basically. They were
love letters.
Yeah, basically love letters between him and Kim. That, it's like, it wasn't anything that was kind of criminal in nature. I mean, it violates the act, yes, but there was no kind of really evil mental state, mens rea. It was just him wanting to keep those probably for his ego, whatever the case may be. But the issue then comes to what extent, were those the only things that were turned over? And it was the 15 boxes that were recovered initially, was that all there was?
Yeah. Now, there were these 15 boxes that have already been recovered, and then now we have this warrant that allows the FBI to kind of raid it and try, presumably, to find more documents. But wouldn't they have been destroyed by now? If for example, and this is the way I'm coming to this question. Former President Trump takes documents to his house, perhaps ignoring the fact that he shouldn't do it. Perhaps. Then the 15 boxes get recovered, and then he essentially gets slapped on the wrist saying, hey, you shouldn't have taken these. These belong to the archives because of the Presidential Records Act. Assuming he kept some more documents, wouldn't the documents that he kept being like, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble because I shouldn't have kept these. I know now because they just took the other 15 boxes. Wouldn't they have been destroyed by now?
Very likely, assuming, he wasn't this super innocent actor who was like, oh, I can't do that. These are, but if they were, in fact, stuff that the FBI were interested in, I think there's a good chance they were. Now, the FBI did interview his previous attorneys, asked where the records were kept, and they led him apparently to a basement, which was then padlocked by the FBI. And I don't know how the legal implications of how that was all done. I don't really know a whole lot of information as far as, because again, this is still his residence. So I don't know enough about to speak to that, but I do know that that occurred. And if that were the case, they might still be preserved if they were in that basement, in fact. I don't know. But no, yeah, I mean, that certainly brings up a good point. But I guess from the FBI and the Department of Justice standpoint, it's like, well, you don't know until you look, right?
This is true.
And there was a lot of speculation that from people within Trump's circle that he didn't think this was going to happen. He didn't think he was going to get raided. Basically, he thought like that was kind of the end of it. So maybe he did. I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of where that comes. But common sense, yeah, you would think you'd get rid of it if it were there and you were in fact had bad intentions. And
even if you didn't have bad intentions, the fact that you took originally all these documents, the 15 boxes plus presumably more stuff. Let's say you didn't have any bad intentions at all. Then you take these 15 boxes and say, hey, you weren't supposed to take these. We'll take them back. The remainder that maybe they didn't find or whatever, even if initially you didn't have bad intentions, I don't think President Trump would have been like, you know what, I also had these other ones that you guys missed. Here you go. He wouldn't do that because he's not that kind of person. So even if we entertain the notion that he did not take them on purpose with bad mens rea, he would still destroy him because he's like, I don't want to give anybody a win by admitting that I did something wrong.
I agree, but I also think at that point your intentions are bad, whether they were at the beginning or not. If you know you violated this act, whether it was intentionally or not, and you're like, oh shit, I still got more documents that should have been turned over, I'm going to destroy them. Obviously, your intentions in that moment
are that overt act destroying them because then you know you shouldn't.
Yeah, but no, I certainly get what you're saying, and I mean, I would be surprised if there are still documents there, and at least that are going to be to a point that are going to be concerning, past the point that you just took documents home that shouldn't have been taken home, right?
Yeah.
So that it'll be interesting to see because this is so far after. But that's going to be something that I want to bring up later. I don't want to touch on it now, but I think the fact that it has taken this long kind of plays against some of the critics, that are kind of opposed to this happening and think it's a political attack. But we'll touch on that later.
Okay. So then before we get there, why don't we then focus on there's $2 million questions.
Yeah.
And the first one is going back to the raid Mar-a-lago. Can they do it? Can the FBI raid former President Trump's house?
It's a very hard question, but it's not actually.
Requires pondering?
Yes. Pondering is absolutely 100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, at the end of the day, as Merrick Garland said, and even Lindsey Graham, no one's above the law. An ex-president is not an exception to that. The reality is the Federal Bureau of Investigation is supposed to investigate violations of the federal law. That's literally their single job. And at the end of the day, if a law was violated by the president, by me, by you, by some random person on the street.
Not me, no, never.
They have the right, they have the authority, and they have the power to do
They have the obligation.
They do. I believe they do have that, at least to investigate. That's literally in the name itself. It doesn't mean that criminal charges need to be brought, that they're going to find something that's going to prove that even a crime was committed or anything like that. But they at least need to investigate, and especially when it's something at this level. They absolutely have the authority, the power to do so, and I think they should do that. Now, people are there's a lot of gaslighting going on right now. There's a lot of, well, what about Hunter Biden? Okay, investigate him too. What about Hillary Clinton? Well, she's already been investigated. But it's like, there's a million, that's smoke and mirrors, right? It doesn't mean that Trump should not have been investigated. He should not be investigated now just because there's other potentially corrupt people doing other stuff they shouldn't be doing. So yeah, the FBI should look into that. I'm not saying they shouldn't look into Hunter Biden. I don't know if they are. None of us know.
The funny thing is, in this case, there's only certain people that can violate the presidential records. Like it applies to the president and the president's papers.
Yeah.
So I guess on top of the authority that has already been granted by law to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, then you also have who can commit the crime?
Yeah.
The people that are close to the presidential records that are meant to be preserved by the Presidential Records Act.
And I think people are like, they're like, well, they don't do this to other presidents because other presidents don't do this. I'm sorry, but whether you like Trump or not, this is the first time, at least it's been made public and found out that a president has taken boxes and boxes of documents home with him when he left. That is not normal conduct.
That's not usual. Yeah.
So yeah, this is unnatural. This is not normal. But that is because President Trump is not a normal president. He was not a normal president by any stretch of the imagination.
It's like when actors take sneak out of the studios like little props.
Yeah.
Like I think there was like, at the Avengers, like people would take like the Mjolnir.
Yeah.
They'll take Mjolnir home.
Yeah.
And then the production's like, what the hell is
For
this?
sure.
Or you would take like costumes.
Because I think it's funny. Or you get military members who'll take stuff home they're not supposed to, like grenades and stuff, which are obviously problematic, but they're like, oh, a souvenir or whatever, And it's like their intentions aren't bad. They're not going to use it, but they just think it's cool, And it's like, I feel like a lot of that stuff was probably Trump. I'm not saying I think there's probably stuff he took home he shouldn't have took home, in full disclosure. But I think a lot of the stuff was like the letters from Kim, where it stroked his ego, and stuff that there was a letter from, I think it was Obama when he transitioned. He took that home too. Obviously, that's not something that's like, oh my God, it's criminal. But there was some praise in there and some good, like, just, hopes and whatever else for him that I think made him feel some type of way. And he liked that, and he wanted to take it home with him.
He's a showman, so it would have been one of those mementos that he can like frame and be like, "Oh,
exactly.
This is a letter that I got from President Obama.
When I was president,
this is a letter that I got from Kim Jong Un." So I get what your point.
Yeah. So, but it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't take away from the fact that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Justice, has the right to investigate and enforce the law. So,
and to your point, those items belong to the people.
Yeah.
The U.S.
Not Trump.
Okay, so now that we discussed that first $1 million question. Does the FBI have the right to, raid the location Mar-a-Lago? And the answer was absolutely yes. Let's talk about the second $1 million question. Will it stick? Meaning the search, whatever they find, charges, anything in general, is it enforceable?
Yeah, and so the answer to that is no.
Thank you for listening. Let it not be said that we are not succinct at large.
This is a lot harder, I guess, question to answer than whether or not they can investigate it and whether or not they have the right to do that. It's two issues. One, there's no criminal provision within the act, and there's no enforcement provision within the act. So it's a law. Therefore, violating the law is a problem, and by definition is against the law. But where you go from there is a lot more problematic. I think it doesn't mean they couldn't bring charges. They certainly could, because it is, in fact, a law. But proving this, especially given there's no guidance on how to do this, but given that Trump, by definition of what the charge is, was either vice president or president, in this case, president, the president of the United States has full authority over classifying and declassifying information. Here they're looking for classified documents. That's the main concern. And there's not like there's specific guidelines for the president. He has to sign a paper. He's got to do this, that, or that, or get approval. The president literally on his own can declassify documents. So, and it doesn't have to necessarily be directly reported either. But generally it is. Generally you declassify something for a reason, and then, you give it to the public or give it to whoever's asking for it, because that's why you declassify.
Yeah, and you make
something.
some sort of like ceremony, of it and say, here's we're declassifying this, and now everybody can find out about it.
Exactly. But there's nothing here really, there's nothing at least within the law saying that has to happen. So he could say, I declassified the documents that I took home. None of this was classified information. I declassified them. And so then the Department of Justice, the FBI. I thought
to myself,
yeah, literally.
Declassified.
Literally, basically. And so the prosecutor then has to prove, one, they were classified initially. Two, that he took them home. And when he took them home to his place, he took them from the office, took them to his personal residence. They were still classified, and that he didn't at any point basically declassify those. And doing that is next to impossible, because you're essentially proving a negative. You're proving that you have to prove that something that you really can't prove unless he came out and said, yeah, I knew they were classified. I took them home with me knowing they were classified. And
I never did the overt act of declassifying.
And it doesn't matter what it was. It could literally be super sensitive information tied to Al-Qaeda. It could be anything. And the president can declassify that. And now it's probably a dumb move. He could give the nuclear codes out if he wanted to, technically. He has authority to declassify information above anybody else. And so the problem is, not only is there not an enforcement mechanism, there's not a criminal provision, but there's also, it's next to impossible to actually enforce this law. If unless he admits to it, which isn't going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Assuming that he, in fact, violated the law itself.
Well, I have two questions on that. So the first one is, does the Presidential Records Act, I know that you mentioned that the FBI was looking for classified documents, but does the act itself apply only to classified documents?
Yeah, generally because the rest of the stuff's already open to the public. So
Right, but if it's open to the public, like I mean, even if we know Kim Jong-un gave a letter to President Trump when he was president, and we know the content of the letter, so it can't really be classified anymore, assuming there's no more to the content of it. We know about it, but wouldn't that still belong to the archives?
It's supposed to still be retained. I don't know that at least the like, I don't want to say importance, but like the purpose of the act is really, I mean, you're still not supposed to take it.
Yeah.
Right. But I think a bigger issue here is, so technically, I think taking anything, all of it's supposed to be archived, declassified or not. But the main concern is whether or not stuff's being taken that is classified by somebody who no longer is president and is just a private citizen to their home. So yeah, I think technically
So
any of that would be
essentially,
a violation.
essentially, what you're saying is the archives need to be able to keep everything.
Yes.
But we're not sure that taking declassified information would rise enough to a level of violating the act in a form that would then trigger an investigation and potential charges.
In short, I don't think the FBI would be kicking in Trump's door if all they were concerned about was letters from Kim and declassified information.
Got it. And the second question that I had for you, after talking about this, was, let's say that along the life cycle of this alleged crime, you have Trump knowing these are classified documents, taking them, they shouldn't take them, to his home, and then not declassifying them. It's a crime because these documents are classified. What does him, President Trump, declassifying them at his house by just waving his hand saying declassified, does that then make a violation moot? Like, is there no violation anymore? Or was just the act that you took him from the office while they were classified, even if you declassified them later, if you took him out, essentially if you took him out of the house while they were classified, that is a violation.
That's it. But the issue is,
you also don't know if right before the door I said, by crossing this threshold, you are hereby declassified.
But if he were like, they were classified when I took them home, and then when I got home, that would be a violation. You took them in the status at the time; they were still classified.
Now you know, folks. Whenever you get out of your house, just say,
when you're president,
declassified.
And
when you think about taking those letters that you got from dictators from other countries,
from Putin,
right before you get out of the White House. Just say, declassify.
That's all you got to do.
That's it.
And the issue we've run into in here, and this is why it's such a weird situation, if we just never had this happen before. And people are like, oh, this, that, and whatever. It's like, and that's why I don't think there was ever an enforcement provision, quite frankly, because it was like, I don't think anybody actually thought they even really need to enforce the law. It was just like, okay, this is going to be fine. People are going to do this. Presidents are going to do this.
People are going to know that this is a law and you shouldn't violate it. And it's like, oh my God, they violated it. What do we do?
Exactly.
We didn't built in enforcement, measures, because we didn't think we needed to enforce it. It's just a law you have to abide by.
And part of the issue is because it is such it's unique in the sense that it obviously only applies to presidents and vice presidents. So it's not like you or me or people who are committing crimes all the fucking time for various reasons. People are committing crimes all the time for various reasons. No, it's just the chances of it happening are very low because there's not that many presidents.
Right.
But then
at the same time,
but then the fact that there is one who actually violates it, then it's like, oh, what do we do now?
Yeah. How do we enforce this law?
Allegedly, well, we know he violated it to some extent. He took documents home. There's no dispute about that. 15 boxes worth that were turned over, but yeah, it's just kind of unprecedented, and we saw a lot of that with Trump, whether you think it's good or bad. He did a lot of things that were never thought that would really occur by any president before. And again, some people like that. Some people obviously don't. This is obviously one of the more problematic ones potentially. But But no, your question, 100%. It's taking him while they're classified to your house. You can't then say, especially now because he's not even president, but you can't say, because by the time he left, that was over. So you can't be like, but even if he were still president, we took him home, you still removed classified documents from the White House and took them to your personal residence, would therefore be a violation.
Got it.
But who would admit that, right?
Now, so we talked about whether the FBI had the right to do it. We said yes, and by do it I mean the raid.
Yeah.
And then we went into the other side. Will it stick? Most likely not. But you and I discussed a separate law, an alternative law that would apply a little bit more broadly and presumably easier to enforce because it does have an enforcement provision. And this would be the same law that would apply to Nicolas Cage in the National Treasure movie.
That's right. That's right. But specifically in the National Treasure movie.
Specifically in that movie, yeah. Because he's been part of thousands of movies just so he can make money.
Yeah.
I respect the hustle. But tell us about 18 U.S. Code 2071.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna read it just for our listeners.
No, just from the.
Oh, I mean, I can do that too. It's really just destroying documents, but no. So provision A says whoever willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, or destroys, or attempts to do so, or with intent to do so, takes and carries away any record, proceeding, map, book, paper, document, or other thing, filed or deposited with any clerk or officer or any court of the United States or public office. Really, it just goes on saying if you take or destroy documents, so you take documents from public office, essentially with you, that are supposed to be kept or preserved, or you destroy documents that are supposed to be kept or preserved, that is a violation. Or if you do both, obviously. The provision B says whoever having custody of such a record, proceeding, map, book, document, paper, or other thing, willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, falsifies, destroys the same, shall be fined under the title or imprisoned not more than 3 years. So this is a felony charge. You could do 3 years in prison for this, and specifically to the president, but it's not specific to the president, but it's important to the president, shall forfeit his office and be disqualified from holding any office under the United States. So this is part of what you hear a lot of people talk about, could this prevent Trump from running again? Well, if you were found guilty, at least under provision B of 2071, he could be. This is a lot easier to prove because it is a criminal statute and there's enforcement mechanisms. There's very specific elements that need to be met, and there's very specific consequences to violating this, up to 3 years in prison and preventing you from holding office in the future.
Yeah.
So
then the interesting thing is, so the penalties, right, that are carried here is you shall be fined under the title or imprisoned no more than 3 years. So that gives you either get a fine or you either get imprisoned.
Yeah.
It could be a day.
Yeah.
It couldn't be 3 years in one day. It has to be up to 3 years. Which is the other connector, and shall forfeit his office.
Yeah.
And be disqualified. So regardless if you're fined or imprisoned, doesn't matter. If you're fined $1 or imprisoned 1 day, regardless of whatever that part of the penalty is, you are disqualified.
Yeah.
You are first forfeit your office and disqualified from serving in office.
Yeah. And I think it really comes down to, again, the character of that individual, right? Because this is a much more kind of it's the taking itself isn't, but it's almost like it's implied some sort of ill will or like intentional misconduct in the situation, right? But this is there's very specific consequences that come of this. Now, realistically, if Trump were found guilty of this, I don't think he'd do any prison time. But what's more concerning to him and probably his supporters is the fact that he wouldn't be able to run for office again.
Right.
And this is a lot. Not only their enforcement mechanisms, there's specific things that you can do, specific elements you can violate to fall under this. But not only would they taking of the documents that happened, we already know at least 15 boxes of them happened, being at issue and potentially violate this. But then you have all the other potential stuff. It's going to be a lot harder to prove, but you had, and so we'll have to see if evidence comes out of that, if there's any prosecutor, but you had pictures that came out recently to light that were supposedly allegedly pictures of torn up documents he tried to flush down the toilet by his aide. Supposedly took a picture. Now, I don't know why they would take the picture unless they were trying to get him in trouble, but who knows? But there were pictures
of gram.
Yeah, maybe of literally torn up pieces of paper in a toilet from him. And you had heard numerous kind of allegations of him doing stuff like that, destroying documents. So that would also violate this very clearly. So it's not just the records he took to Mar-a-Lago. It's potentially the destruction of other records
while
in
at
office.
the office, while at the White House or in office.
And this is a lot easier to prove. So while as the Presidential Records Act, at least to enforce, Presidential Records Act, it's going to be kind of like, one, can you prove it? And then two, where do you go from here? This specifically doesn't say classified, doesn't say unclassified. This applies to all that. And it applies to stuff that the other act doesn't while you're still in office. So this very likely, if they can get evidence to support that, this would be very much able to be enforced. Now, it's not going to be easy because, again, a lot of time's lapsed. So even if he did hypothetically take this home, who knows if that stuff's still there, if he still retained it. And a picture of documents in a toilet taken by who knows who, and even if they testify.
You got to prove that was a document
is that
that
gonna
really
mean,
mattered,
no.
in the context of the statute. And
exactly. You're going to need a lot more than that. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But if, in fact, it were charged and he were found guilty, he could be prevented from running for office ever again. So that is certainly concerning for a lot of people. It's a huge consequence, and that's not even including potential prison time, which I don't see him doing. But, it's a possibility.
Yeah. So there are going to be inevitably arguments that this is motivated by political interest, right? So obviously right now the president is Joe Biden. He's a Democrat. Joe Biden appoints the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. And like you said, this was a raid conducted by the FBI or by the Department of Justice.
Through the
FBI. So there's going to be implications, and there have already been in the last day, because this happened yesterday and today.
Yeah.
The tweets, people saying, this is a political attack, witch hunt, and all the different arguments that we've heard in the past.
Yeah. There's been a lot of outrage. Honestly, even people who you would expect would potentially be, not as supportive of Trump, like DeSantis from Florida, who is seen as being a potential, opposition to Trump as far as running for office. He even came out and supported it, saying this was political, saying this was just a political attack. You had the Republican National Committee come out, and they said countless times, we have examples of Democrats flooding the law and abusing power with no recourse. Lindsey Graham says, it almost took a kind of a, I don't want to say balanced approach, but it was like he acknowledges that this is important to an extent, but also insinuates it's political. He says, quote, "We're 100 days away from the midterm elections. President Trump is likely going to run again in 2024. No one is above the law. The law must be above politics. However, launching such an investigation of a former president this close to an election is beyond problematic."
That is what I think is kind of hypocritical.
I agree 100%.
Because when there were investigations of other people closer to a presidential election, he saw no issue with that, as long as the people we investigated were not part of his party.
Yeah.
And the thing is, either we're all going to be diving in or we're all going to stay out of the pool.
Yeah.
You can just, pick and choose whatever you want.
And most notably was Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. Now, do I agree that these investigations by third parties before presidential elections are problematic? Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. At the same time, is there an interest in the public in making sure that someone who is potentially a criminal, and I mean it in the sense of having committed a crime, right? Is there an interest in us ensuring that this person does not get into office? Of course.
Absolutely.
In this case, Lindsey Graham he just always talks through both sides of his mouth.
Yeah. No, he does. He does. And however you feel about him, but that's exactly what it is here. Part of him wants to acknowledge, and I think probably because of that, because in the past it has been done. But it's like, you can't have it both ways. You can't support the investigation in Clinton, which was literally all the way up to the election day by the FBI, the same FBI that we're now attacking, that we supported back then. And then say that this is, unjust and this is this horrible political attack when we're way, way before we're anywhere even close. He hasn't even announced he's running yet. Right. So it's politics. It's hypocritical as hell. And honestly, it's quite hilarious because I think what bothers me most about that, he says we're 100 days away from the midterm elections, which is true. Midterm elections. You're not electing President Trump in the midterms. Moreover, it's like it's because it's closer that is the problem. But my take on that is, wouldn't you want them to build a case? Wouldn't you want them to make sure there was evidence of a crime, to actually really investigate, to look into this before getting a search warrant, to conducting an investigation, actually investigating this before you get to that point? Because what is the alternative? You bust in his door from day one because you think in your head maybe something's going on?
Yeah.
Would anybody be okay with that? Absolutely not. So
Great.
This is what you should want. You should want a thorough investigation leading up to what obviously was enough for a judge to sign off on, to agree, okay, yeah, this is good. There should be evidence of what you're saying here. I agree. There's probable cause. Go in, go ahead, do what you need to do, investigate. And that's all this is. It's an investigation. Maybe they go in the door and there's nothing there. What is, at the end of the day, what is the harm in that? If there was probable cause to suggest there was a crime and that there was evidence of the crime here, they go in there, there's nothing there. Doesn't that help the Republican Party? Doesn't that help President Trump? They go in there, there's nothing. So it's like, what is, I mean, obviously, if there was no evidence, they wouldn't get the warrant. And if there was a warrant that was approved by somebody, a judge, where there was nothing to support the warrant, that's problematic. But clearly there was something that was signed off on there. And I think that's going to come to light at some point down the road if this does end up in a charge, or the Republican Party does take the midterms. You better believe they're going to get access to that warrant, what was presented. But the FBI knows that. I don't think this, obviously is a witch hunt, but yeah, it's understandably, it's politics. There's a lot of people on the right, a lot of Republicans who are trying to say this is a witch hunt, trying to say this is politically motivated, and I'm not, naive to the point where it's like, obviously this could benefit the Democrats potentially, if there is something, but it's like the decision on whether or not to actually investigate. That should, if a crime had been committed and something at this level, that should be more important to the country than whether or not this might hurt President Trump's reelection. Either there's nothing there and it doesn't lead into a charge. You would rather that come to light before he announces he's running for president and before an election actually happens, because then he's vindicated. Then he's like, look, there was this witch hunt. I'm innocent. See, that's just going to help him in the election. But if there is something there, and he really did do something he's not supposed to do, that's seriously problematic, well, doesn't the country want to know that? So maybe you don't re-elect this guy? Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I can only see it benefiting the Republican Party to an extent as well, because it is done so early. We're talking about the midterms, 100 days before the midterms. So I don't agree with Lindsey Graham at all. I think it's a ridiculous argument. But, of course, it's politics, and both sides are going to spin it to their advantage. And I'm sure the Democrats are going to do that as well. The FBI is investigating President Trump, he's a criminal, and it's like, before we even know what the outcome is, right? Maybe they go in there, he's got a bunch of napkins in boxes and there's nothing there. It's a bunch of trophies of him.
Classified napkins.
Yeah, who knows, right? But it's just, I think that argument's ridiculous.
Another reason why I think it's also hypocritical is because, to your point about wouldn't you want to find out, I feel like there has been a point in the conservative movement where they just want to affirmatively essentially look the other way. And if there were evidence of a crime, and if there were proof then that the crime was committed from the warrant and there was a conviction, they would still call this a witch hunt. And that is problematic. So I don't have much hope on that front, because in order for you to be able to bring this argument to the table, you have to be talking to someone who is willing to accept the argument. In this case, I think there's plenty of evidence that the Republican Party in the majority is not interested in doing that.
Yeah.
But then a separate point that I wanted to bring as you were talking, and I was thinking of this, all these arguments from the Republican Party are saying, this is the political weaponization of the Department of Justice. Well, when Trump was in office, he had, presumably, the ability, if you will, to weaponize the Department of Justice and other law enforcement offices. And he tried. Yeah. And we saw him try very publicly. And nothing came of it. Yeah. Why? Because the people that were in charge of the FBI, people that were in charge of the Department of Justice, didn't see any recourse to proceed with investigations.
People who he appointed.
Exactly. People who he appointed. Yeah. People who he had some sort of control over. Yeah. Right? So are these people, the Republicans that are crying injustice right now, are they saying that then Trump didn't have the ability to do it, or that he just was not successful in doing it? What point are they trying to make? Because they make it seem like it's very easy to weaponize these offices.
Yeah.
And we saw Trump try for 4 years and nothing came of it.
Yeah.
So weaponizing these departments is not as easy as these guys want you to think.
No. And I think, if anything, it shows the January 6th committee that's been investigating the riot at the Capitol and potentially Trump's involvement, to what extent he knew that was going on and he planned it or whatever. They had repeatedly been begging Garland essentially to bring forward charges. They're like, look, we've brought you plenty of evidence. Now, we talked about on the last episode how it's going to be next to impossible to prove any of those charges. But Garland didn't. At least he hasn't yet. And that's a good thing. That shows that he is not satisfied, at least at this point, to a level where he is going to bring charges forward.
Which is also what Barr did.
Exactly.
When Trump was like, do it.
Yes.
Trump could have been, in this case, the January 6th committee, begging the Attorney General to bring charges, to lock people up. And Barr was like, no, I don't see evidence enough for me to make a case. And we talked about this. The Attorney General as being the head prosecutor of the country. As a prosecutor, you want to make sure you have a case in place that you can then bring. And Barr declined to do it, and Garland has so far declined to do it.
Exactly.
Because there is no evidence that you can bring in right now, and that's what you would want in a law enforcement officer.
Which brings me to kind of wrap around to this point is, for them to get a warrant to conduct this raid, given that he hasn't entertained the January 6th stuff, there's got to be something there. There's got to be something that at least pushed him, evidence that's pushed him to make a conclusion that there very likely is something still at Mar-a-Lago that is very concerning. And that kind of brings me to the last discussion point on here that I want to bring up. I don't think this is about the Presidential Records Act. I think this is about January 6th. I think there was something, and he violated the Presidential Records Act in the process. But I think this stems from what happened on January 6th, the interviews that were conducted.
How dare you?
By Garland and everything else. I don't think they're looking for, did Trump take a letter from Kim, from North Korea, or Putin, a love letter, or whatever. I don't think that's what the issue is. I think they found, through their interviews, through the investigation that's been going on this entire time, something that leads them to believe, and this is me speculating 100%, so this is my opinion. There's no evidence to support this. I think, if I were to guess, the whole group that we talked about before that met secretly in the hotel, the whatever the heck they called themselves, where there was like his attorneys, his advisors, some white supremacist people, they all met the day before the January 6th, January 5th. They met and planned this. Now, we don't know that Trump was tied to that. There's nothing been showing he's directly tied to that. That's the issue. That's why they can't really prosecute any of these crimes. I think they might have found something, or they think there's something there that's going to tie Trump to that. So I would not be surprised if at the end of the day, if he didn't destroy it, assuming there was something there, I don't know if there was or not, that they have reason to believe there are documents there or evidence there that ties Trump to those conversations, planning. This wasn't just, we're going to go protest on January 6th, and we're going to go Trump speech, and we're going to go protest the certification of the votes. This was a very detailed plan of, here's where we're going to go, here's what we're going to do, the different government buildings we're going to attack. This wasn't a protest. This was very much a white supremacist by, the Proud Boys and other organizations, very coordinated attack to essentially take over the government by Trump's direction, at least is what they were hoping to do. So I think that's ultimately what this is. I think this is a way to get to that. I think he violated that. They got evidence to suggest he violated that. That's what the warrant's for, but I don't think that's what they're looking for. I don't think they're looking to slap Trump on the wrist and say, hey, you took this document home, you didn't declassify. I think they're worried that there is shit that supports the January 6th investigation. And I think it's going to come to light if there is still that, if he didn't destroy it. And if it was there to begin with. I don't know, again. But if it is there, and I think there's reason to believe it's there, because getting a warrant by the FBI to investigate an ex-president isn't easy. To get a judge to sign off on that, knowing the implications involved in that, and how public it's going to be, and you're the judge who signed off on it, there's got to be something there, or at least reason to believe there's something there. So I don't think this has anything to do with Presidential Records Act. I don't think it's anything to do with 18 U.S. Code 2071. I think this is January 6th.
So please forget everything we just talked about for the past 40 minutes. None of that is implicated here. You heard it here first. Jeff thinks this is January 6th.
So we'll see. But I think I would be surprised, given how reserved Garland's been so far, if this doesn't lead to charges. I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, I mean, and again, because to your point, it feels very highly unlikely that you're out there, like you said, asking a judge to sign a warrant that is going to be very publicly noticed by everyone, and then just to come around and say, never mind. Or yes, we found that he took these 2 emails that were still classified.
He broke the law.
Yes. So
nobody cares about
it. feels like playing dumb games and winning the dumb prizes, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier. You don't want to encourage other people to do it if you don't enforce it, right? If you don't prosecute it. At the same time, you don't want to prosecute petty crimes against presidents that seem just political moves.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
And that is not a great position to be in.
It's not. And it's potentially some of the hardest decisions to make. Because, you don't want to, like you said, if Trump took 2 emails home of something that was harmless but was technically said to have been preserved, nobody cares about that. The public doesn't care about it. The FBI shouldn't care about it. Nobody should care about it. Democrats shouldn't care about it.
You shouldn't care about it.
I do care about it deeply. But if it's something, and I believe it is something, at least they think there's something, to the level that is not innocent, it's not, this is just minor. This is a big deal. I think if Garland, which he did, obviously approved the FBI to investigate this, and then a judge signed off on this, I think this is a lot more serious. And then even the obstruction stuff. And there was a lot of, with that, I will say a lot of politically motivated, dossier was kind of politically motivated. There's a lot of politics involved in that. But I think this is a lot more, in my opinion, and that was before Mueller got to it. I think he handled it very well, quite honestly, because he didn't make a decision one way or another. He's like, that's up to you, Congress. Here's what I found. Here's the facts I found. You do what you want with it. It was kind of passing the buck, and prosecutors should really make that charge.
At the same time, it's nuanced, right?
And he knew it was
nuanced.
At risk, the implications it could have. But this seems a lot more. Garland seems to be pretty sure there's something there, and he doesn't seem like the kind of guy, from what he said and how he's acted so far, to just randomly start investigating stuff he doesn't believe in. So I would be surprised if this doesn't go somewhere.
Why don't we end this discussion by looking at the famous words from former President Trump from last night, where he says, quote, "These are dark times for our nation. As my beautiful home, Mar-a-lago, in Palm Beach, Florida, the beautifulest home," that's not part of the quote, "is currently under siege, raided, and occupied by a large group of FBI agents. Nothing like this has ever happened to a president of the United States before." To your point, none of the president has taken stuff from the White House that they should not take it. But then again, like you said, if this implicates more than just taking stuff home when you should not taking it, there's a whole different spin on that. Yeah. But then he also says, quote, "What is the difference between this and Watergate, where operatives broke into the Democrat National Committee, Here, in reverse, Democrats broke into the home of the 45th President of the United States." End quote.
What?
I mean, the one thing that I just kind of
Democrats broke into this.
Yeah, I can't reconcile that last quote because
Pelosi was there. She was leading the raid. She was as fucking M60. She's like, bah!
First, he's talking about Watergate and this. Mm-hmm. And then he says the Democrats are the ones that broke into his house. And then he's saying, what is the difference? Those those two things are the same.
I think they are.
The same thing.
I really think
so.
they are.
One involved political espionage, people getting caught,
Yeah.
and then being prosecuted for it. This one involves the suspicion, reasonable suspicion, probable cause of a crime. The Department of the Federal Bureau of Investigation investigating,
Yeah.
and the president tweeting, or I guess truthing.
Yeah.
This is the Democrats that broke into my house.
You know what I think his argument is? I think he's saying that the Democrats are the equivalent of whoever broke in on behalf of Nixon.
Yeah.
And they're acting, so they're committing the Watergate scandal, basically.
Yeah.
The FBI is, by breaking into his place.
That's not a very sneaky move.
No, it definitely wasn't. Getting the warrant and then going and serving that warrant.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very.
Let's
sneaky
use the lawful means of investigation of search and seizure.
Yeah.
To try and find evidence of a crime that we don't believe exists, and that a judge doesn't believe exists, but he's still going to sign off.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, it's. I will say this again. The whole smoke and mirrors, what about Hunter Biden? What about whoever else? Again, they should be investigated too. If there's something there, they should be investigated at the end of the day. But that doesn't take away from what we're talking about here. Yeah. Okay, so you can't say, look at these other people, and that somehow gives Trump a defense. It doesn't. If he did, in fact, again, I'm not concerned if he took home love letters, if he took home whatever, stuff that doesn't really matter. That's really not a concern to me. Is it a violation? Yeah. But what's at issue, and what I think is at issue, is much more concerning. And trying to point fingers at other people, while you might have a legitimate argument if Hunter Biden, in fact, did do stuff, he's not president. Nor is President Biden Hunter Biden. And we're talking about a president of the United States violating a law and potentially having part in planning an insurrection. I'm not saying it happened. I'm not saying he was involved. But that's what this investigation, I believe, is ultimately what's at issue in this investigation. Who knows? We'll see where it comes from. But regardless, it's president. Hunter Biden's not president. Hillary Clinton is not president. Okay? So unless you got something on Biden that is actually actionable, that would be an equivalent argument. And then even if that were the case, he should be investigated too. 100%. Yeah. But I haven't seen anything other than Hunter Biden did something, and we believe Biden's tied to China because Hunter Biden went to China or something. I don't know how that's connected. But, the end of the day is everybody should be investigated if they, in fact, did commit a crime. But
if there's suspicion that they committed a crime?
Yeah.
Reasonable suspicion?
Exactly. If there's a reason to believe they committed a crime, but it's like, everybody should be concerned about that, regardless of political party, ideology, everything else. And especially if this individual is potentially going to run for president again and was president when they allegedly committed a crime. So I don't know why it's so controversial.
Okay, so why don't we close this video with a poll? Do you think Jeff is completely wrong? And the FBI is going to say, we found the 2 emails we were looking for, and that's it?
Witch hunt!
Or do you think there might be something else here, that triggered this FBI raid? Let us know in the comments below if you think Jeff is right or Jeff is completely wrong, or you're like, you know what, I have a different idea of what this could be related to.
Yeah. So
it could be a witch hunt. It could be a political move.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen we've seen weirder things. So let us know what you think.
Yeah. So if you agree, put January 6th in the comments. If you disagree, put whatever
Put August 8th.
Yeah. Put Jeff's a fucking idiot. I don't care. But yeah, just let us know. It'd be interesting to hear what everybody's kind of viewpoint is on this whole thing. And to some extent, I see all sides of it. I see concerns with everything. So we'll see.
And we'll find out. Obviously, we'll keep you guys posted. Whatever comes out, we'll discuss the legal implications of whatever comes out of this raid. So thank you again for sticking with us through another episode. This was Lodge.
Mar-a-lago.